Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing our deep dive into this Michigan program, heading into spring practice, fall camp, the 2024 season. We took a look at the offensive line, the defensive line, the offensive skill. Now we're taking a look at this Michigan secondary, going to throw in that linebacker position as well, and talk about what we saw from this unit in 2023, which was, straight up just the best unit we saw across the country in college football. But more importantly, what is this unit going to look like in 2024, replacing guys like Mikey Sandstrom, like Josh Wallace, a very exciting position group to talk about and kind of continuing the narrative that we've had this whole Michigan deep dive, which is a lot of people from an outsider's perspective kind of assume this Michigan team is going to take a massive step back in 2024 with all the moving parts, with all the talent that is going to the NFL draft. But the Michigan fans that follow this program closely, they know, one, you're returning a ton of talent, but more importantly, there is a lot of young talent that's emerging in this roster that's going to get a lot of opportunity in 2024. I want to talk about some of those names. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out, as always, to the Michigan fans. Many of you guys, if you're not new, know I'm a massive Michigan fan. This is the program that I love talking about the most, and the amount of support you guys have shown, whether it's for these deep dives, whether it's for talking about this coaching staff, it's been absolutely phenomenal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and more importantly, would love to hear your feedback in the comment section, guys that you think emerge in this 2024 year. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to take us back to that 2023 year where you truly really saw one of the best Michigan secondaries that we've seen. And for my money, the best secondary that we saw in the country last year. There were a lot of questions about, can this Michigan secondary hold up against the Washington Huskies in that national championship game? And I think we all got our answer. They certainly did. And you take a look at what made Michigan so special in the back end. Yes, you had guys like Will Johnson, Mikey Sandstrom, two guys that I think might be the best players at their position group across the country. You talk about Will Johnson as a boundary cornerback, probably the best cornerback in college football heading into the 2024 year. And then I challenge people to name a better nickel than Mikey Sandstrom and what he did for this Michigan team the last 2 years playing that position. It was absolutely loaded. You look at the numbers, right? A 55% completion percentage given up. That was top 10 in the country. 157 yards passing per game given up. That was number 2 in the country. You look across the board. Michigan was top 10 in most important metrics in that back end. And after looking at the film, after looking at some of the numbers from this Michigan defense, I think there's one thing that really stands out. And it's something that really gets overlooked across college football, but something that is so important, that is tackling. When you take a look at Michigan in their missed tackles, 89 missed tackles on the season through 15 games. You compare that to the only other college football team that played 15 games, the Washington Huskies, they had 177. So we had half of the missed tackles that the Washington Huskies had on defense. That is truly a phenomenal number. And doing all these deep dives for teams that played significantly less games than the Michigan Wolverines, 89 is the lowest number that I've seen. And you talk about how important that is in the modern day of college football, where teams are predicated on getting the football out in space, making defenses tackle in space. Michigan did that at a phenomenal level. You look at yards after the catch. Washington, again, the only team to play 15-plus games, 1,900 yards after the catch. Michigan, only 1,100. That's really what I think set this Michigan defense apart, especially in the back end. They just didn't miss tackles. Now, I think the more important conversation that you're excited to get into is, what does this unit look like in 2024? And I want to start with this linebacker position where you lose, Mikey Barrett, who's been really just a leader of that defense for the last couple of years, and then Junior Colson, one of the more talented Michigan linebackers that we've seen over the last couple of years. You look at who's coming in. I think what excites you the most is you have two extremely talented linebackers that are only going into year 3 of their college football careers. And that's where you normally see that big jump up for linebackers, right? Because when you come in as a college football linebacker, normally you got to get your feet wet, right? Get right between the ears, get your bodies right. Both Jayshawn Barham and Ernest Hausman have played phenomenal football their first 2 years at the college level. Right, Ernest Hausman, a guy that transferred in last year, many Michigan fans know, a guy that was phenomenal as a true freshman for Nebraska, comes to Michigan, played very well during his time, but it was just kind of hard to find the field for this Michigan defense at that linebacker position. Played really well when he got his reps. And then you talk about a guy in Jayshon Barham, who I think many Michigan fans recognize from the games that we play against Maryland as just a physically imposing linebacker. 6'4", 235 pounds, can go sideline to sideline, can operate in space, can play in the tackle box, takes on blocks extremely well. You look at Ernest Hausman and Jayshon Barham, one, you're getting two guys that were phenomenal their first 2 years of college football. What excites you the most, though, is what does it look like for year three for both Ernest Hausman and Jayshon Barham? I don't think it's crazy to say this linebacker room gets better in 2024 than it was in 2023. And obviously, Junior Colson, Mikey Barrett, they set a high standard. But I am extremely excited about these linebackers heading into 2024. You throw in a guy like Jimmy Rolder, who played a lot as a freshman, didn't play as much as a second-year player. You have a guy like Jaden Hood, who I think a lot of Michigan fans are just finally excited to see healthy, maybe get some opportunity going into year four. It's a deep position, but I think it's a position where your two starters are guys that are all conference performers going into year three of their college careers. Really excited about that linebacker room. Now, you move to the secondary, and that's where the conversation really gets interesting, right? Because you lose a Josh Wallace on the boundary that played a lot of really good football for Michigan, and you lose Mikey Sandstrom at that nickel role, who was phenomenal for Michigan. Now, where do we start? I mean, we start with the All-American Will Johnson, who you look at the numbers. I don't need to read the numbers for Michigan fans, but I mean, faced 38 targets. I don't know why people are throwing at him 38 times. Only gave up 17 catches. A 44% completion percentage when Will Johnson was targeted. 4 interceptions. Will Johnson is a pro's pro. And what is really special about Will Johnson is he's that true quarterback one. I mean, he takes away half of the field. And so that makes your defense so easy to scheme around when you have a true cornerback one that you can trust kind of putting on an island, and you can kind of allocate your safeties and other guys in the back end to other areas. Will Johnson, a vital part of this cornerback room. I think we know who our one boundary cornerback is. Now, I think the next interesting question is, all right, who starts on the other side of Will Johnson? A very similar conversation that we were having last year for this Michigan team. They ended up getting Josh Wallace in the transfer portal. The names that are coming to mind for me, two guys. One, Jair Hill. As a true freshman, you heard a lot of buzz from spring practice, from fall camp, from the fall practices. A guy that didn't have a ton of opportunity to play for Michigan as a true freshman, but going into year two, I mean, certainly could see him locking down that cornerback 2 spot. But another guy I throw out is Jaden McBurrows. I mean, Jaden McBurrows, when he plays, has played extremely well. Faced 13 targets last year, only gave up 5 catches. He's a very good tackler in space. He is extremely gritty. I mean, you feel comfortable going into spring practice with probably Jaden McBurrows and Jair Hill really battling it out for that boundary cornerback spot. And I think the next question you have is, all right, we lose an All-American nickel in Mikey Sandstrom. Who comes up and plays that nickel role? Now, I think there are a couple names that you could keep in mind. One, if Jair Hill is really that dude at the boundary, you could see Jaden McBurrows kick into that nickel position, but there are a couple other names that I have my eyes on. One is Keon Sapp, who primarily played that safety position for Michigan, played phenomenal against the Washington Huskies. And I think if you're Wink Martindale, Sherrone Moore, looking at this defense and obviously the future defensive backs coach, your goal is to get Rod Moore, Keon Sapp, and Makari Page all on the field at the same time. And 2 of them are going to play safety. And I think one of those guys is going to come down and play that nickel role. My pick right now is Keon Sapp. And then you look to the back end, you have Makari Page, you have a guy like Keon Sapp, you have a guy like Rod Moore to kind of figure out how you're going to use those 3 guys that, 1, are extremely versatile, and 2, are 3 of the best safety / nickels that you can find in college football. So I think that's one of the most interesting conversations is, all right, who emerges as that nickel role, and then who are the 2 guys that are playing in the back end? Now, that's not counting out guys like Zeke Berry, who I think certainly could come in and play a lot for Michigan in this back end. I look at this Michigan secondary as kind of a puzzle, and you got a lot of good pieces, and you know one of your pieces is Will Johnson on the boundary, and you know you got 2 really good pieces guaranteed in the back end at those 2 safety spots. Now, how do you fill in the rest? There are a lot of good players. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of competition. I think spring practice, you're kind of looking at, all right, who emerges at this spot for Michigan heading into that 2024 year. And I think that's what's most exciting. Now you tie this back into Michigan looking for their defensive backs coach. This has to be one of the most attractive positions in college football. I mean, one, the Michigan defensive backs coach, you normally have pretty good success moving on in your coaching career. But more importantly, I mean, this position group represents an opportunity for a coach to come into Michigan, do a phenomenal job with an extremely talented Michigan back end, and really vault their coaching career as well. And that's why I'm so optimistic that Michigan and Sherrone Moore will be able to replace Coach Klink, who is a phenomenal coach for Michigan. I don't think anyone is going to argue against that. But I think there's going to be a lot of good candidates that are looking at this job and looking at the personnel for this Michigan program in the back end and saying, yeah, this is a very attractive job for Michigan heading into that 2024 year. At the end of the day, I mean, this is our last deep dive for this Michigan program. And every single time we talk about, yes, you are losing some guys that are going to be phenomenal pros in the NFL, but you have a lot of guys, one, coming back. But more importantly, there's a reason that Michigan has had so much success. I mean, guys don't transfer out. A lot of other programs, you might have had a Keon Sapp transfer out after not playing as a freshman. You might have had a guy like Zeke Berry transfer out, or Jaden McBurrows. These guys are staying the course, and now it looks like Michigan has a ton of talent and a ton of depth to kind of fill out this secondary heading into 2024. A position group that I'm extremely excited about, was phenomenal in 2023. I think going to be really good in 2024. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. We'll cut it there. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.